two prophets, two men who defied kings, faced armies, and touched the impossible. Elijah called down fire from the heavens. Elisha brought a dead man back to life with the mere touch of his bones. This is the legacy that crossed generations: the fire, the mantle, and the Spirit. In a time of drought and idolatry, Elijah rose as a living judgment against the throne of Ahab. Alone, he stood before 400 prophets amidst a corrupted nation, and the sky answered with flames. But after the fire came the flight, and when fear consumed him, God did not cast him aside. He gave him an even greater task: to anoint the one who would carry the mission forward. Elisha did not receive a task. He inherited a legacy ablaze. He was but a plowman, hands stained with soil, shoulders burdened by routine. But when Elijah's mantle brushed against his skin, the ordinary was set alight. And then the miracles began. Poisoned waters were healed. Oil overflowed where there had only been lack. An entire army was cast into darkness with a single command. And when all was done, when even the prophet lay at rest among cold stones, his bones still carried life. This is not merely the tale of two prophets. It is the story of a God who descended in fire, spoke through silence, and passed his Spirit from one generation to the next, until someone dared to bear the mantle in the valley of redemption. The land was dry, yet hearts were even harder. Ahab ruled Israel with blood-stained hands and eyes fixed upon Baal. The altars of the Lord had been torn down, the voices of the prophets silenced, and while idolatry spread like a plague, a man appeared before the throne uninvited: Elijah of Tishbe. He bore no sword, no scepter, no escort, only a sentence: "As the Lord lives, there shall be neither dew nor rain, except at my word." And then he vanished. While the king stood mute and the heavens closed, Elijah disappeared into the wilderness. Hidden among stones and thorns, he was sustained not by men, but by ravens, sent with bread and meat. He drank from a lonely brook, until even the brook ran dry. But the drought that scorched Israel never touched what God had set apart. He was then sent to Zarephath. There he met a widow on the brink of death. All she had was a handful of flour and a drop of oil. Elijah asked for what little remained, and when she obeyed, the impossible took place. The flour did not run out. The oil never ceased. And when death took the woman's son, Elijah went up to the room and cried out. 3 times he stretched himself over the cold body. 3 times he pleaded for life, and the boy breathed. But the battle was far from over. Upon a high mountain, before the gathered people, Elijah summoned the prophets of Baal. 400 men shouted, danced, cut themselves, but silence was their reply. When his moment came, Elijah rebuilt the altar with 12 stones, dug a trench, soaked the offering with jars of water, and then raised his voice. "Answer me, O Lord, so that this people may know that you are God." The sky split open in flame. The fire consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench. The people fell with their faces to the ground. "The Lord is God. The Lord is God." Then Elijah came down from the mountain with blood and judgment. The prophets of Baal were taken to the brook Kishon, and not one escaped. When all was done, the heavens finally moved. Clouds gathered, the wind stirred. The rain that had not fallen for years roared upon the land. But Elijah did not walk. He ran. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he outran the king's chariot. A man on foot carried by something no horse could ever match. The fire had fallen, the people had bowed down, but in the palace, another flame was lit. Jezebel, wounded in pride and enraged by the fall of Baal's prophets, unleashed a venomous oath. By this time tomorrow, Elijah shall be dead, or may the gods deal with me ever so severely. Elijah fled. The same man who had stood alone against Baal's prophets now wandered without direction, weighed down by a weariness that came from within. He left the city, abandoned his servant in Beersheba, and continued alone into the wilderness. There was no plan, no destination, only despair. Crossing the arid land, Elijah collapsed beneath a withered tree. Weary beyond flesh, he sank to the ground, his soul burdened by silence. He felt abandoned, defeated, as if every act of obedience had been in vain. The heavens gave no answer, and the earth offered no rest. A broken plea escaped his lips, one that only God could hear. And there, beneath that barren sky, he wanted to end it all. Then sleep claimed him, deep, heavy, and still. But God did not forsake him. During the night, an angel touched him and woke him. Beside him were bread baked over stones and a jar of water. Elijah ate in silence and lay down once more. The angel touched him a second time and said, "Arise and eat, for the journey will be long." It was a clear message. God was not finished with him. Elijah obeyed. He rose and traveled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Mount Horeb, the very mountain where Moses had received the law. Upon reaching that sacred place, he took refuge in a cave. But even there, God's presence found him, and the voice spoke, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered with a troubled heart. He said he had been faithful, yet now felt alone. The Lord's altars had been torn down, his prophets slain, and he alone remained, marked for death. He may have hoped for comfort or a reply, but God gave him something deeper, a revelation. He was commanded to step out of the cave. And then the manifestation began. First came a mighty wind, strong enough to shatter stones. Then the earth trembled violently. After that, fire split across the sky as it had on Carmel. But God was in none of these signs. Finally came a gentle sound, a soft whisper, barely audible. And in that silence, Elijah felt the true presence of the divine. He stepped away from the cave's mouth, covered his face with his mantle, and stood before the unseen. Once more, the voice spoke clearly. God instructed Elijah to return the way he had come. He was to anoint Hazael as king over Syria, Jehu as king over Israel, and Elisha, son of Shaphat, as prophet in his stead. Elijah had been the instrument of judgment. Now he was the keeper of succession. The fire had revealed who God was, but it was in the whisper that the next generation began to be prepared. Elijah had come down from the mountain with a new mission. The whisper of God had not brought comfort. It had brought instructions to anoint kings and raise up Elisha, the next prophet. He went to Abel-Meholah, where he found the man plowing the land with 12 yoke of oxen. Without a word, he cast his mantle upon him. Elisha understood. He left everything, sacrificed the oxen, burned the plows, and followed the prophet. There was no ceremony, only obedience. Now days had passed, and the two walked together. Elijah knew his time was drawing to a close, but he announced nothing. He simply walked. They passed through Gilgal, then Bethel, and Jericho. In each city, Elijah urged Elisha to remain behind. But every time, Elisha refused. It was not stubbornness, it was honor. As surely as the Lord lives, I will not leave you, he repeated. Along the way, the sons of the prophets approached and whispered to Elisha that the Lord would take Elijah that very day. He listened, but did not wish to speak. He was already prepared, not with answers, but with presence. He knew that witnessing miracles was not enough. One had to walk the path to its end. When they reached the Jordan, Elijah removed his mantle, rolled it in his hands, and struck the river. The waters parted, as in the days of Joshua, and the two crossed over. On the other side, Elijah stopped. There were no more evasions. It was time. He turned to Elisha and said, "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken." Elisha looked him in the eye and replied, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah drew a deep breath. It was a bold request, but a worthy one. He simply said that if Elisha saw him being taken, it would be granted. They continued walking, no longer heading anywhere, just walking. And then the heavens opened. A chariot of fire descended with horses ablaze, tearing through the sky with light and thunder. The two were parted. A whirlwind formed, wrapping around Elijah, and he was taken up before Elisha's eyes. The disciple cried out, filled with anguish and awe, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen." But Elijah was already ascending, lifted by the force of heaven. The mantle fell. It landed upon the ground among the dust and the footprints of farewell. Elisha approached, took up the mantle, and stood there for a moment. He was now alone. The calling had passed to his hands. He returned to the Jordan. The river remained closed. Without hesitation, he struck the waters with the mantle, just as he had learned. "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" And the river opened. There were no thunders, no fire, no audible voice, but the answer came, clear as day. The Spirit had passed on. Elijah was gone. But the mission had only just begun. Elisha had crossed the Jordan alone. He bore the mantle, yet had not yet felt the full weight of the calling. He was no longer a disciple. He was now the prophet of Israel. And God did not delay in confirming it before men. The first sign came in Jericho. The city appeared fertile, but the waters were tainted. The land was barren. The men sought him out urgently, and Elisha did not hesitate. He asked for a new bowl filled with salt. He walked to the spring and cast the salt into the water. Then he declared, "Thus says the Lord, I have healed these waters. No more death or barrenness shall come from them." In that instant, the spring was purified. The invisible had bowed to the voice of the one sent, but the mantle also drew scorn. As he left the city, a group of youths mocked him. They shouted, "Go up, bald head! Go up!" It was more than mockery. It was contempt for the prophetic office. Elisha turned. He did not argue. He simply pronounced a curse. From the woods emerged 2 bears. 42 of them fell. Fear spread. The authority of heaven was no symbol. It was real. Years passed. Elisha traveled from city to city, and in Shunem he found hospitality. A wealthy woman prepared a room for him to rest in whenever he passed by. In return, Elisha declared that she would bear a son, despite her husband's old age. She doubted, but the miracle came to pass. The boy grew, but one day he fell ill in the field. He died in his mother's arms. She carried him to the prophet's room, shut the door, and left without a word. She rode to Mount Carmel and threw herself at Elisha's feet in anguish. "Did I ask you for a son? Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" Elisha listened and descended with her to the boy's body. He entered the room, shut the door, prayed, and lay upon the child. Eyes to eyes, mouth to mouth, hands to hands. The body grew warm. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. But famine had also struck Israel. A widowed woman in debt came to Elisha. Her creditors threatened to take her sons. All she had was a single jar of oil. Elisha instructed her to gather as many empty vessels as she could from her neighbors. At home she shut the door and began to pour, and the oil did not stop, jar after jar until the last. When it ended, she sold the oil, paid the debt, and saved her sons. At another time, during a crisis, Elisha fed 100 men with 20 barley loaves. His servant hesitated. It was far too little. But the prophet simply said, "They shall eat, and there shall be leftovers." And so it was. For when God chooses to multiply, the little becomes a testimony. But not every miracle begins with faith. Naaman, commander of the Syrian army, was a powerful man and a leper. An Israelite servant told him that in Samaria there was a prophet who could heal him. Naaman went to Elisha expecting ceremony. But the prophet did not even leave his house. He simply sent a message. "Wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan." Naaman was furious. He wanted gestures, not obedience. But his servants persuaded him. And when he finally yielded, he immersed himself 7 times in the river, and his skin became like that of a child. Naaman returned transformed, offering gifts. Elisha refused. The glory belonged to God. It was not for sale. But Gehazi, his servant, ran after the commander, lied, and took what Elisha had rejected. When he returned, the prophet confronted him. Was this a time to accept gifts? And he declared, Naaman's leprosy shall cling to you and to your descendants. Gehazi left that place leprous, white as snow. The power of God also judges. Later, the king of Syria sent troops to capture Elisha, for the prophet had been revealing his plans to the king of Israel. They surrounded the city of Dothan by night. Elisha's servant awoke and saw the enemy army. Terrified, he ran to the prophet. But Elisha, calm, prayed, Lord, open his eyes that he may see. And the heavens were unveiled. The mountain was filled with horses and chariots of fire surrounding Elisha. Then he prayed again, Lord, strike this people with blindness. And the entire army was thrown into confusion. Elisha led them to Samaria, and only then asked God to open their eyes. Suddenly, they were surrounded, but they were not slain. The king of Israel sought vengeance, but the prophet commanded, Give them bread and water. And the enemy was fed, treated with honor, and released. The one who healed also judged. The one who beheld heavenly armies also set tables. Elisha was not merely Elijah's successor. He bore a calling that balanced power with compassion. And the miracles, one by one, began to reveal not just a prophet, but the God who moved behind him. War had reached the walls of Samaria. The king of Syria, weary of ambushes foiled by Elisha, chose to strike directly. The city was besieged with full force. The gates were sealed, supplies cut off, and the people left at the mercy of famine. Days turned into weeks. Scarcity gave way to madness. Women bargained over the lives of their own children. What once was unthinkable became routine. The king of Israel, unable to bear the shame, tore his robes in despair and swore to kill the prophet. He blamed Elisha for the siege, as if the presence of God were the cause of tragedy, not the only hope of deliverance. He sent a messenger to execute him, but Elisha already knew. Seated in his house, surrounded by elders, he looked to the door and said, Behold, the son of a murderer is coming to take my head. When the messenger arrived, the reply was ready. Thus says the Lord, Tomorrow at this very hour at the gate of Samaria there shall be an abundance of flour and barley. The people shall eat. The king's officer scoffed. Even if the Lord opened windows in the heavens, could this be? And Elisha answered precisely, You shall see it with your own eyes, but you shall not eat of it. The next morning, 4 lepers who lived outside the city walls decided to surrender to the enemy. If we stay, we die. If we go, we might live. But when they arrived at the Syrian camp, they found only silence. No soldiers, no voices, just abandoned tents, warm food on the tables, silver and gold scattered on the ground. The Lord had caused the enemy to hear the sound of a mighty army, horses, chariots, invisible warriors. Seized by panic, they had fled in the night, leaving everything behind. The lepers ran to the city and told the guards. Samaria opened its gates. The people surged like a flood. And exactly as Elisha had declared, flour and barley were sold for a mere coin. The famine was broken, the prophecy fulfilled. But the officer who had mocked tried to hold back the crowd at the gate. He was trampled. He died without tasting the miracle. Years passed. Elisha fell ill, not from wound nor weakness. It was simply his time. King Joash came to visit him. He wept at the sight of the fading prophet, echoing the words once spoken at Elijah's ascent. My father, the chariots of Israel and their horsemen." Elisha did not respond with sorrow. He asked for a bow and arrows. He placed his hands upon the king's hands and commanded him to shoot eastward. "The arrow of the Lord's victory over Syria," he declared. Then he told him to strike the ground with the arrows. Joash did so 3 times and stopped. Elisha was angered. "You should have struck 5 or 6 times. Then you would have utterly destroyed Syria. Now you will only win 3 battles." Even on his deathbed, the prophet still gave direction, still saw the battles ahead, and still judged hearts by the measure of their surrender. Soon after, he died and was buried. But the calling God had placed upon his life did not end in the grave. Some time later, as a group of men were burying a corpse, they were startled by an enemy raid. With no time for rites, they hastily threw the body into Elisha's tomb. And when the corpse touched the prophet's bones, it revived. The dead man rose, and his feet stood upon the ground they had believed was lost. The flesh had long decayed, but the spirit resting upon those bones still carried life. Elisha's legacy was not a statue, nor a palace, nor a lineage. It was miracles. Miracles that began with oil, passed through sickness, fed multitudes, purified waters, exposed hearts, and raised the dead. The mantle that fell in the wilderness now echoed through generations, even after death. Elisha still made the impossible rise. Elijah departed in the wind. Elisha rested upon stone. But what once dwelt upon them still moves. The spirit that set the mountain ablaze and raised the child from death did not perish with the prophets. It waits, not for the flawless, but for the devoted. The mantle does not choose names. It chooses responses. And when the earth trembles, when the heavens fall silent, that is when it descends. Whoever sees it, let them not hesitate. For the calling has never ceased to cross generations. It simply awaits the one who dares to grasp it.